Hello and welcome to the CR Wood Shop. This is Bert, your friendly woodworking instructor. In this video I'm going to show you how to create a splined miter joint using the miter saw and the table saw. One of the joints required for assignment 6 is a splined miter joint. This joint is commonly used for picture frames. You've probably all seen a picture frame. This is a 45-degree miter. We can easily do that on the miter saw. It's important to know that the miter joint cannot be fastened together with just adhesive. The ends of our stock are end grain, and the end grain tends to wick the glue or adhesive away from the joint and produce a weak joint. So anytime you create a mitered picture frame or any other type of frame, you need some additional mechanical fastener or a third piece to help hold the two components together. The splined groove here is going to be cut on the table saw with a special jig, which I'll show you in a few minutes, and we will create a thin piece of material. A spline could be solid lumber or it could be a piece of plywood, but the grain should travel perpendicular to the face of that miter. If the grain was running parallel to it, the joint would snap right along the line, right along the glue line, because wood likes to split or tends to split along the length of the grain. The first step for creating this is that we need to cut 45-degree miters on the end of our stock. So I have two pieces of stock here. This is poplar. I've drawn 45-degree lines on there, and this is what we're going to cut. Alright. For safety, you should wear safety glasses and hearing protection if the saw is noisy. I'm going to use the Festool Capex, and I will adjust it to 45 degrees. For this saw, there is a lock lever here. If it's latched, you want to lift it up, hold your thumb down on this pivot point and pivot to 45 degrees. You'll feel the machine jump or lock in right at the 45-degree setting, and then I'll push this down and lock it into place. When you cut miters, it is important that you hold the stock on the obtuse side of the angle, rather than standing on the right hand side and having my hand close to the blade. I try to stand on the obtuse or the larger angle side and hold the stock, and then I can make the cut. So I am going to have to flip this over. My lines are going in the wrong direction for this side of the miter, and I think I'm going to turn the camera. Hopefully that's a little better, and I will proceed to make the cuts. You'll notice that I hold the blade down and release the trigger to turn off the power and wait until the blade has stopped spinning before I lift it out of the stock. When you're cutting miters, you're going to create these little offcut triangles which could tend to kick back or fly through and hit the fence or wedge in there. So it's best to hold the blade down, let it release the switch, and let it turn off before you proceed to lift the blade. We'll cut the other piece in the same manner. And there we have a 2 45-degree cuts to create a 90-degree mitered corner. And now we will move to the table saw and I'll show you how to cut the spline groove. Here we are at the table saw, ready to cut the groove in our miter to receive the spline. For this operation, we have a specialized shop-made jig. This jig has two components. It has a base, which has an aluminum rail, plastic laminate faces on it so that it's very slick, and it's nice and solid, heavy. This will drop over our normal table saw fence and be clamped in place so that it's rigid and doesn't move. The second component of this jig is a sliding carriage that will hold our stock. The mitered end will be at the bottom. There's a triangular block that adjusts up and down. This will help hold your stock down in place. And then there are two toggle clamps that hold your stock against the face of the carriage. The carriage has grooves and a slot on the bottom that match and mate up with the base. When we drop this component on, the pieces slide very easily. I'm going to tip you down so that you can see what we're doing here. This jig is fairly complicated, but it's very easy to use. If you wanted to make one for yourself, this would be a great project. If you plan on making a lot of picture frames and miters, this would really be beneficial for you. Now we need to adjust the jig and the table saw to cut the grooves in our stock. The first thing we would need to do is adjust our saw blade to a 1/4 inch height to give us a 1/4 inch depth groove. We're going to assume that it's at a 1/4 inch for demonstration purposes, and then we could adjust the entire jig back and forth with our fence like we would normally adjust the fence. You'll notice that there are two clamps and two 45-degree angled fences here. That is to allow us to clamp a stock in the front and to clamp a piece of stock in the back. The reason we do that is that when we create a picture frame, if we are not centered, if our spline groove is not centered, if we cut both grooves on the front on one portion of the jig, when we go to assemble the joint and we flip one piece around, the error will now be doubled and the pieces will be offset, whatever that error might be. So it's much more accurate to cut one half of the joint on the front portion of the jig and the other half on the back portion of the jig. And I have some dowels in the way here, but you can get the idea there. You'll notice that the 2 points overlap. A common question with this jig is, why can't I clamp both pieces of wood in there and do it at the same time? And the reason is that this jig is made to accommodate a wide range of stock width so that we could do a lot of different projects on this jig. If we had narrow stock, you probably could clamp both in there and it would work fine. But in most situations, we're using stock that's a couple inches or wider. So you'll have to do one piece at a time. It's not really that difficult to clamp a piece in here and make the cut, take it out, place the second piece in there, and make your second cut. It won't take that much time. We have our stock here prepped, ready to go. A common thing that you will see with picture frames is stock that has a molded profile into the face, and that could make the stock thinner on one edge than the other. If that's the case, you will need to put your miter slot off center, And that is where this jig really comes into play. If we need to be offset towards the back, we would cut one piece here and then set the other piece there with the molded face out, the flat face against the jig. That'll give us a better surface, a better clamping surface to ensure that it's flat. And the toggle clamps have a rubber pad on them. We could put a little bit of foam or a pad or something under that face as well to protect our molding. I'm now going to back this up. I'm going to double check, make sure you can see this. I think we're okay. I'll place my stock in to the jig, bring it right down to the table, lock the triangular block down on top of the stock. That will help hold it down and keep it from lifting up off the blade, and then I can clamp the toggle clamp into place. Now the entire jig and our stock can be adjusted right and left with the table saw fence. We can bring it the stock right up to the blade. If we have pencil marks on there, we can draw pencil marks to locate the spline groove if we would like. Otherwise, we can just line it up to where we would like it, lock the fence down, and now we have a rigid system that holds our stock in place and allows us to make the cut. It's important, safety-wise, that you are aware of the blade, and as you hold the stock, you keep your hands out of the path of the blade. You can go forward across the cut, and you can back up and then unclamp it. If you go forward and try to unclamp, there's a possibility of unclamping this. It takes a little pressure and maybe your hand will fall into the blade. So just be aware of that. Keep your hands clear and unclamp it in a safe position. And now we will proceed to make the cut. I'm going to cut this piece here, remove it, and then I'll clamp in the second piece and we'll do the other cut. Here we go. Unclamp it, clear the carriage, slide in the second piece, being aware of the blade, bring this down to the table, lock it in, and clamp down our second piece. You can hold the carriage, help hold your stock in there, go nice and slow, make the cut. And in this case, I'm going to wait till the blade stops spinning before I unclamp that toggle clamp. I just don't want my hand moving towards the blade. We can pull out the stock, and now you can see that I am slightly off center, and that's okay because the pieces came off the jig this way. We'll keep the backs lined up, and we will align them in that manner, and you can see that rectangular cut lines up with both pieces. Get a nice clean alignment, and we'll be able to easily make a spline that will fit into that groove. If you would like to make the groove wider, you can just adjust the fence over slightly and make another pass. A lot of times we will use a hard material like a hardboard or masonite or a dense MDF as a spline. In this case, it will be visible on the outside corner there, so you might want to use a different colored hardwood. Often you'll see decorative spline miters using like a dark wood or a red or something that contrasts with your primary wood. It's a very easy joint. The jig is very easy to operate, and it makes a nice strong joint that looks attractive. If you have any questions, please let me know on the discussion boards.